The arms race in the NFC North is heating up this offseason with some really big decisions ahead for the Vikings, Packers, and Lions. That's why it's so critical that the Chicago Bears get this quarterback decision right so they don't keep falling behind in the division.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, you name it, we've got it for you. But make sure you're hitting that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel in particular, so you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well and see us live here in person at the NFL Scouting Combine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On the show today, we're going to be joined in person, on site, from the Indiana Convention Center with Carmen Vitali of Fox Sports. She covers the NFC North as a whole, but she lives in Chicago. She's a little bit of a Chicago girl in there, but, of course, objective and covers all four teams. But we're going to look at how the Bears are approaching their big quarterback decision this offseason and try and cut through a lot of the noise and the smoke screens of this time of year and kind of get at the core of what's happening and where things are going to go from here. And then we'll kind of compare the path the Bears are on to the rest of the NFC North. Not necessarily apples to apples, but kind of look at, okay, where are the Bears in their own process compared to where the Packers are in their process, where the Vikings are in their process, and obviously the Lions a bit ahead of everyone else in terms of the processes here, but really kind of getting a sense of how the Bears are trying to catch up in this NFC North division with a woman who knows these teams really well. We're here at the NFL Combine in Indianapolis, joined by Carmen Vitali from Fox Sports, on Twitter at CarmyV. Carmen, thanks for joining us in person at the Combine.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I guess, obviously, it feels like the Bears have been kind of the talk of the Combine again for the second straight year when you have the number one overall pick.
Yeah.
Are you reaching that point of fatigue a little bit where it's like, all right, we've been talking about this quarterback thing for months and months and months now. Can we just get it over with? Or are you still finding some energy in it?
No, I'm definitely the former. Just because, again, this is the second year in a row where the Bears have the first overall pick, and at least at this time, at Combine time, because, as you know, Ryan Poles traded that away last year, right, 1 week, I think, after the Combine. So now it's just kind of this constant talk about the Bears, what they're going to do. But I think that there's a lot of validity in saying that last year they were not ready to kind of take on a quarterback. The roster just wasn't quite there. The situation wasn't quite set up. And now you look at the roster, you look at the cap space they have, you look at the draft picks and draft capital they have, you can envision an environment where this might actually be a good situation for a young quarterback. And I think fiscally, that's the most responsible decision, is to move on and take a quarterback with the number one overall pick.
Do you like the way that they've approached it? With how, we get Justin coming on a podcast and saying, okay, he's just wanting to get over with. I understand. There's no perfect way to go through this transition. Right? No team has nailed it, but it's I don't know. How do you feel about the way that they've just gone about it in terms of what they've said publicly, how they've sort of brought people along the process? I mean, do you feel like this is kind of the smartest way to do it, or you think they should have done it slightly differently?
Yeah, I don't know that you could have done it any differently, because there's so many moving parts with this, because it's not only are you weighing. Ryan Poles said, listen, I'm going to listen to offers for that first overall pick. And you want to see those offers, and you want to see if you maybe can get that historic haul, or that haul that's going to blow you away, I think were his words, that he needs to be blown away by an offer, or blown away by a quarterback too. He wants to be blown away either way. So
Don't we all?
Yeah. I know. But you have that aspect of it, but then you also have, okay, if we are going to trade Justin, what can we get for him? Who needs him? When do they need him? When are you going to have the most leverage? And I think that happens before free agency too. So there's so many different moving parts that it's easier to just not say anything. And I mean, any team is going to they're going to keep everything as close to the vest. But I do think that Chicago can maintain leverage as long as they haven't tipped their hand quite yet. And staying mum about all of this they have every incentive to do so.
Yeah, well, the problem is that leaves us on the outside here to go through this. We get to the overthinking part of the quarterback stage where now, and it seems like it's all on Twitter, right? It's not in real life, but it's like,
right.
I know. Is Jaden Daniels the top quarterback? Could the Bears be considering Jaden Daniels instead? And I've heard more than once down here, like, maybe they would strongly consider moving to 2 and
giving Washington Caleb Williams
and saying, we'll take some draft picks. We'll take some draft picks and we'll take the second best quarterback. And I'm left still feeling here like why try and overthink this? Like, if there's a quarterback that you think you want to take, shouldn't you just stay and take him at 1? I mean, I don't know. Ryan Poles to me seems like a guy who's very like calm and thoughtful. And I don't know. Does it feel to you like this is all just kind of noise and we're just going to land at a spot, or do you think there could be some real surprises still coming?
No, I think this is all noise. This is all the Twitter sphere. This is all the rumor mill. And I mean, we're in smokescreen season right now, so you have to figure that never really listen to anybody's insider scoop that has an agenda. You know, everybody has an agenda this time of year, whether or not that's for or against the Bears or whatever it is. I do think a lot of it is just the noise on Twitter, because this is what these guys are paid to do for a living. This is what Ryan Poles was hired to do in Chicago. He was hired to fix this franchise and to overhaul it and to do this rebuild, which I fully think was kind of billed as this 3-year rebuild. And if you look at it from that perspective, the Bears are right on schedule. They really are. They made a lot of strides with the defense by the end of this last season. They don't really have that many holes on this roster to fill. Yeah. And now you have around $80 million in cap space, and you have a significant draft capital with two top 10 picks that you can flip and do. You know, we've seen Ryan Poles get creative when it comes to these draft picks and everything like that, and really be able to hit later on as well. I think we're not giving enough credence to what talent he can get later on in the draft, because we've seen it, and we've seen it materialize into day one starters all across the roster. So I have faith. Everything Ryan Poles has done up until this point should instill some faith, and he needs to be able to have a crack at this. He needs to be able to have a crack at solving the quarterback issue. Justin Fields is not his guy. I think that's another really big component about this too, where he gets to get his guy and be responsible for his guy and live and die with his guy.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. Because new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you bet $5 on anything. And if you win, not only are you going to get the winnings for your $5 bet, but then FanDuel is going to put an extra $150 in bonus bets right into your account that you can do to bet on anything. Just because, we're in the offseason doesn't mean there's not football bets for the NFL draft, tons of props about which players are going to go where, free agency bets are around the corner, or all of your other favorite sports, the NBA, college basketball, hockey, soccer, tennis, boxing, you name it, they have it all on FanDuel, all in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So to get your $150 in bonus bets, visit FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and NBA. I'm glad you mentioned the rebuild timeline here, because that's such an interesting thing, because you feel like there's this external pressure and then there's this internal pressure, right? There's the oh man, we got to catch up to everybody else, and then there's the we're on our own timeline with our own plan, and I feel like that came to a head with the coaching decisions this offseason, right? It's like where a certain percentage of the fan base wanted to fire Matt Eberflus and kind of restart that timeline a little, not totally, but kind of restart that timeline, and the Bears are like on their own timeline, but they look and see. I mean, Green Bay is advancing their timeline pretty quickly. Yeah. The Lions are already on their timeline, and the Vikings are about to start to kind of get into that, start their own kind of. Well, we're seeing exactly what the Vikings are going to do there, but I don't know. How do you feel like? Do you think 3 years like this is the right amount of patience? Do you feel like this is going to produce the results they want, or do we end up looking back after 3 years and being like, well, how far did we really get?
Well, I don't think that you can look at other teams in the division, as tempting as it is, and gauge your timeline off of that. You have to gauge what you think is realistic to build sustained success, which sounds like exactly what Ryan Poles wants to do. It's kind of that slow and steady. We're not trying to capture lightning in a bottle. We're not trying to go out and get all of these expensive free agents, pay them for a year, and try and win a ring that way. As we've seen, it's worked before, but it doesn't work for long. And so it sounds like, you know, everything that Ryan Poles has done up until this point is kind of that slow but steady build of a foundation and to set this team up for sustained success. Because if you do look around the division, you see Green Bay has had this succession plan for all of our lives. They know exactly how to build a team, and it to the point where whenever they retool, it really is a retool, because they are right back in contention the very next year after losing a Hall of Fame quarterback. I mean, it's incredible. And then you see the Lions and the way they build their team, the way Brad Holmes builds that team, which is just taking the best possible players you can and guys that you really feel are going to be immediate contributors. And that way you have a really young roster, but that's really, really effective. And the Lions window right now, I mean, is really long, because you have a guy like Aiden Hutchinson under team control till 2026. You have Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, or Jahmyr Gibbs under team control until 2027, and Jack Campbell. Sam Laporta till 2026, but I mean, he was the second rounder, so he's not costing you anything right now, and he's shattering all of these rookie records for tight ends. So you look at those guys and you realize that this division is set up to compete for a long time. So I really think that if this works like they want it to in Chicago, that is going to help them keep pace with the rest of the division.
Yeah, let's stay on Detroit for a second, because I was going to ask you, like, how long do you think that would? I mean, they've got young players, but Jared Goff is not a young player. I mean, he's not old,
no,
but he's not a young quarterback.
No.
And there's always the Ben Johnson. How much longer will they have Ben Johnson? Every year we think we're going to be on that, but he keeps sticking around.
Yeah, he keeps coming back.
I don't know. Like, their window is certainly open, and it's got some runway ahead of them. But is that 3 years? Is that 5 years? I mean, how do you sort of feel about the longevity of Detroit's success right now?
I do think that with Brad Holmes, again, he is really cognizant about taking the best players regardless of need, and that manifests itself in some really, really strong position groups. So you look at, he's built through the trenches a ton, especially that offensive line, and you have Jonah Jackson that's up for a new contract. You have Graham Glasgow, who's a depth guy, up for a new contract. But at the same time, even if you re-sign those guys, you can't put it past Brad Holmes to still draft a guy and make sure that that unit is solid, because that's how you keep good positions good, and you keep the strengths of this team strong. And he's not afraid to go against the grain, and we saw that last year when he took a running back at 12 overall and then followed it up with an inside linebacker. I mean, this is not something that you see very often, but it's worked for them because it's resulted again in these really young day one starters that they have very cheaply for a long time, and he just keeps doing that, and he keeps doing that. So I think I can't say enough about the job that Brad Holmes has done and how he's in lockstep with Dan Campbell, and they just all seem on the same page in Detroit.
It's funny how it's almost the reverse of what we think about as like the dominant strategy of cheap quarterback, expensive pieces around him. They've got not expensive quarterback, but cheap pieces around him, and it's like, wow, if you just hit on all your draft picks, it's amazing.
It's amazing how that works out for you. It's just actually hitting on those draft picks, which are all, I mean, it's a crapshoot. It really is. Every single draft pick is.
And yet I can't help but feel something similar about Green Bay right now, where it's like, okay, they swing at the fences for all these receivers that none of them are never a first-round receiver. And
never.
And that you look at that core, and it's like, okay, Watson and Dobbs and Hicks. I mean, those guys, those aren't Pro Bowl players, but like somehow they made a pretty good, darn good passing offense out of a bunch of young draft picks, and they got a couple of tight ends. They got a young backfield. I know the offensive line is still kind of a part of that process, but do you feel like, I know you said earlier, like the Bears shouldn't necessarily compare themselves to other teams as they go through the rebuild, but do you feel like Green Bay is kind of ahead of the curve there as far as like, they've got the young quarterbacks, they've got the young players, like the young foundation seems like it's all there and just needs to keep getting older, whereas the Bears are still trying to get the last couple of pieces in that young foundation to then get to where Green Bay is now? I mean, is that...
Here's the thing about Green Bay. You cannot compare. Nobody can compare themselves to their team building process because that is such a unique organization. They do not have an ownership group. That does not. So that means that you do not have the internal pressures that a lot of these teams have to deal with, and you also have a decades-long track record of this system in particular, and this succession system, this team building system working. So you can lean on that when you ask for a little bit of patience, and that's kind of what they leaned on with Jordan Love. I think before the season, you heard Matt LaFleur, you heard Brian Gutekunst say, tempering expectations on Jordan Love, saying, he's been in this offense for 3 years, but there's a difference between knowing it and really going out and executing. And not to mention, he has all these young weapons and they're all learning right along with him. They don't have their timing down correct, like necessarily right. They don't necessarily know which routes they're optioning into and all that other stuff. But you saw the maturation of that, and Jordan Love weather that storm. And that was the biggest indicator to me that this was going to work. It was because Jordan Love was progressing regardless of what was around him and regardless of the fact that his receivers were still learning right along with him. And you saw all of that kind of click at the end of the season because lo and behold, you just kind of need some reps. Amazing how that happens.
Yeah, for young players. Huh?
And then they clicked at the right time, and all of a sudden they made a playoff run. They went to the divisional round and shocked the world. I was in Dallas for the game, and it was using just a plethora of weapons because when you have that many as a defense, you can only game plan for so many guys.
Yeah.
And when you have, all right, okay, we're going to shut down Christian Watson, we're going to shut down Romeo Doubs. Well, then you got Dontavian Wicks, you got Jaden Reed. You
pull Bo Melton out of nowhere.
Right, pull Bo Melton out of there. And then, by the way, you have now Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave because Luke Musgrave had returned from injury. So you had all of these different weapons, and then you also have a backfield and a guy like Aaron Jones who can take games over with that experience that he has. It just all works beautifully together, but at the same time, they are allowed to build their team that way because Green Bay is a very, very unique team. They're in a very unique situation. It does not provide a blueprint for anybody else.
What do you think is going to happen with Jordan Love's contract? I mean, obviously, while all these other players are cheap, but we get back into the quarterback, just as the Bears want to reset the quarterback timeline, right. Jordan Love's at the end of his timeline, kind of like where Fields is on his timeline. Yep. But at the same time, one great year of Jordan Love is that going to get him $50 million yet? Probably not. But then do you pay him now? Do you wait another year? He's great, and then you pay him more, and then does that make it harder to rebuild the team? Like, where do you sort of see things going in the immediate timeline?
Well, there's a little bit of precedent for this because this happened with Aaron Rodgers, right? His first year as starter, although Jordan Love surpassed his stats, obviously surpassed his win record, and made the postseason in his first year as starter, and did all that. But Aaron Rodgers then went, and after the year after he took over the starting role, he signed a 6-year extension, or he signed a 6-year deal, and it was a modest $10 million a year deal with a $35 million signing bonus on top of that. So his cap hit, I think, came to $17 million a year, but that was back in 2009.
That'd be a steal today.
Right. So that's like peanuts compared to, so now you have to account for inflation, and you also have to account for the fact that the Green Bay Packers did not pick up Jordan Love's 5th-year option. They gave him this 2-year extension, and they essentially were hedging their bets while Jordan Love was betting on himself. So you look at this and you look at Jordan Love and you say, okay, if he's willing to bet on himself and it pays off, then now that it has paid off, of course he's willing to bet on himself again. So I don't know that I would, as much as I think Green Bay is going to try to lock Jordan Love into as long of a contract as they possibly can, because I don't think that you can get away with not paying him $50 million this year because of the fact you only have a 1-year sample size. And if you lock him in for 6, 7, 8 years, then that's going to be a really cheap contract. But I also think that on the flip side of this, Jordan Love is like, I bet on myself once. I'm going to try and bet on myself again and have a shorter term contract. That way he knows that he's going to be able to renegotiate that in 3 to 4 years and really, get to the top of the market if he continues to ascend. It's going to be very interesting.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp is here to provide online therapy to help you truly be at your best. I cannot strongly enough recommend doing therapy online like with BetterHelp. It's a really important part of my mental health regimen. I always like to say, it's like going to the gym, but for my brain, right? I don't go to the gym because my body's broken, but because I want my body to be at its best, its healthiest, and its strongest. And I don't go to therapy because my brain is broken, but because I want my mental health at its best and at its strongest. And it really is a total game changer to feel like your happiest, most fulfilled self. So if you've been thinking about starting therapy, Give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited right to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then they match you with a licensed therapist. And you know what? If that first therapist just isn't quite the right fit for you, that's okay. You can change at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. I want to go to the Vikings now because that's the other quarterback decision that's still up in there. It feels like they can't afford Kirk Cousins, but they could make room if they needed to. But then, do they also re-sign Kirk and draft the quarterback, or you just say, you know what, let's just go with the rookie and kind of start that? Because they've been doing this like half getting younger, half trying to win now strategy for a while.
It's the competitive rebuild that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah talked about when he was hired.
Yeah, and it feels like you're kind of like half-assing two things. It'd be nice to kind of whole-ass one thing.
Right.
So, not that we can sit here today and know what they're going to do, but I guess if you're Kwesi, what direction do you go?
I think that you see how far apart you are with Kirk Cousins, and I think that comes down to the guaranteed money. I mean, we saw Kirk Cousins' $84 million contract, fully guaranteed, unprecedented a few years ago. I think he wants to keep that up. Now, from a Viking side, is he worth that? He's on the wrong side of 35, coming off an Achilles injury. That's a very bad injury, and it's really hard to get back from, especially, again, when you're a little bit older. And I don't want to say like old because I'm Kirk
NFL
Cousins.
Old.
I know, NFL old. I'm like, Kirk Cousins and I are the same age. But here's the thing is it's going to depend on, can they give him the vote of confidence and say, hey, we're going to give you this. It might be a little bit less than you get somewhere else, but we're going to fully guarantee it. And then is no other team going to match something like that or give him more? I mean, I think Kirk Cousins is still really about his money. He's got a family to feed. Yeah. And clearly that's been the case over the last, over his entire career, really. I mean, this is a guy that has an astronomical amount of career earnings because he's fought for himself and he knows his worth. And that being said, other than Kirk, the Vikings options are... I mean, we heard from last year they were willing to kind of trade the farm and they tried very hard to go up and get CJ Stroud. And I could see if they don't feel like they're really getting anywhere with Kirk Cousins come draft time, maybe that's something that they do. And it kind of screws you over because you don't have really a lot of capital to work with to begin with. But at the same time, that does mean that you have a quarterback under contract for a very cheap amount of money. And then you can continue to build the team around him as your cap space kind of goes up and up and up.
We've been talking a lot about, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, obviously is kind of being at the top of the draft, and people put J.J. McCarthy probably in the fourth-ish spot there. But like the big three are not going to make it to 11 where the Vikings are.
Right.
Do you feel like they have to go up and get a guy that can really be a difference maker, or can they be comfortable sitting at 11 and being happy with McCarthy or Bo Nix or Michael Penix? I mean, you got to go get, if you're going to do it.
Exactly. I think it's either you get something done with Kirk Cousins or, I'm sorry, I was just like, whatever. Either get something done with Kirk Cousins or you go all in on a rookie quarterback and you go up and get somebody. And again, like I said, it's going to cost you. But at the same time, in the long run, if you're developing this guy and you really believe in this guy, you're going to have him under team control for a little while. It's, again, the whole cheap quarterback, build up the team around him. And so as the next couple of years go by, you can use the cap space that you're saving on not paying a guy like Kirk Cousins or a blue chip, like bona fide franchise quarterback, especially when you're going to need that money for Justin Jefferson very soon.
I was gonna ask about that too. Like if they go to the rookie quarterback plan, then rookie quarterback's not going to be your Super Bowl window is not year one. It maybe starts in year 2 or year 3, but do you want to be paying Justin Jefferson top dollar while you're waiting for that young quarterback to develop, or could you leverage him into that asset to get more to build around your young quarterback? I mean, to me, I don't think there's any question that when you have a really good young player, you pay him and keep him. But all of a sudden, that becomes the really big contract on your books where you already don't have a lot of room to work with.
Kwesi was borderline offended at the question earlier this week about if there's any chance of them trading Justin Jefferson. He's like, absolutely not. Like, we have a blue chip player. We drafted that blue chip player. Of course, we're going to want to keep that blue chip player. And it's true, because Justin Jefferson is also a guy that's going to help a developing quarterback. And he's going to provide a constant and a guy that can win at the catch point. He can win at, whatever point at this point, because he can win those contested balls and he can get himself open. He can create separation. I mean, this is a guy that can do it all. He is the best receiver in the league, as far as I'm concerned. And he wants to be paid like it, but he deserves it.
Yeah. Kind of the same conversation with Jalen Johnson. It's like, all right, like play the best that he did in the position in the league. He deserves it. You drafted him, pay him, that kind of thing. Well, great. Carmen, it's been a lot of fun. Let everybody know where they can find your work and what kind of things you're working on right now.
So all of my articles appear on foxsports.com. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Carmi V, and that's where all of my appearances are. That's where I kind of upload everything. And, if you're into just little quips and stupid musings on my part, probably some Sopranos memes too. Go ahead, check it out.
Some nice updates from Europe, right? Was it Amsterdam or where did you?
Oh no, I went to the UK and Ireland. Yep, it was a fun vacation.
And you came back just in time for the combine. Wow, great time.
Yeah, haven't stopped since July 31st when training camp's open.
Yeah, right. So. Well, hey, hopefully you get to sleep in your own bed sometime again real soon.
Maybe, we'll see.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lauren.
Yeah. Thanks again to Carmen Vitali from Fox Sports for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Come on back on Monday as we'll recap any and all big things coming out of the combine workouts. Those didn't start till Thursday here as we recorded this podcast, so we haven't been able to talk about how the guys are doing on the field, but that'll happen all weekend long, and we'll break it all down for you right here on the podcast. And any other big Bears news that comes out. It certainly feels like some kind of quarterback decision is happening sooner rather than later. It's probably within the next couple of weeks, and we'll be on top of it for you 5 days a week with your daily Bears analysis right here on the podcast. So keep making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day, and in return, I'll make sure that I give you another opportunity to bear down.